The whole AI marketplace seems completely untethered from all of the other kind of market ballast that we deal with. Um, we didn't have a bunch of clients coming to us asking for experts on blockchain or, a SPAC executive, et cetera. But the demand for world-class AI talent really is unprecedented right now.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Our broadcast today features a panel from our Metis Strategy Summit held on October 29th. The conversation examines the shifting role of the Chief Information Officer, and the panelists who join us were Katie Graham Shannon, Global Practice and Managing Partner of Heidrick Struggles, Art Hopkins, the co-lead of Technology Officers Practice at Reynolds, and Henry Mann, the co-founder and Managing Partner of Candela Search. The session was moderated by Metis Strategy co-head of Research, Media, and Executive Networks, Stephen Norton. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
So I think it's no surprise that the technology leader role is evolving and continues to evolve. Every one of you in this room can speak to that. So I'm excited to welcome these three to the stage today to really dig into that evolution from the front lines and start to see some of the changes that are happening in the market and really dig into that conversation. So please allow me first to introduce Katie Graham Shannon. She is the global head of the Digital and Technology Officers Practice at Heidrick Struggles, based in San Francisco. Welcome, Katie. Art Hopkins, he leads the Global Tech Officers Practice for Reynolds, also a senior member of the board and advisory group based in Atlanta. And then to my immediate right, Henry Mann of Candela Search. He founded the firm just over a decade ago. It's a boutique retained search firm with offices in US and Europe that works with digital and technology leaders, and he's based in DC and London. Welcome again. So like I said, you are all kind of on the front lines of how this is changing in real time. So Katie, I might start with you, but please anyone jump in. What's the big change that you're seeing in the technology leader role right now?
Title is one. I was looking at just in the Fortune 200, we placed about 23 of them in the last several years. And I think it was 19 of them. No, I'm sorry. It's 18 of them do not have the CIO title. So I think title's one. The remit of those same executives, 50% of those roles were newly created roles. And what I mean by that is the person that was in the role previously, it's a different role. So, they may have added data. It's the role itself has expanded. I think reporting structure is another one. 75% of those that I just mentioned report into the CEO. Mm-hmm. I think the remit that we get from the CEOs has evolved, and I would center it around four different things: creating value and protecting it, driving revenue, humans. We've talked a lot about humans today, but I think, and I break that into two things. I think it's someone who can hire and attract the right talent. And then we used to say a culture fit. I think we've sort of substituted fit with impact because the company itself is transforming. So it's not necessarily a fit. It's help us make an impact and evolve from a cultural standpoint. But I think the human aspect is really important.
Yeah. Excellent.
I'll give you a couple of thoughts. One coming straight at your question, and then I'll pull up an altitude. It might be an overstatement, but I would start off by saying that work from home is dead. And if not dead, it's at least on life support. But what I would say is it is for sure no longer the norm. And as evidence of that, what I would submit is that on almost every search that we are recently doing, and I can't think of an exception off the top of my head, it is a requirement for this executive to reside where the corporate center is. There will always be exceptions. When we're working with global clientele, often they have offices in many places, but I would just urge people to be mindful of that. And then pulling up an altitude, a lot of the work that I do is board searches. And every board search I'm doing right now, there's a mandate to bring someone onto the board who's been at the forefront of the digital disruption of a relevant industry, either dealing with or dealing out that disruption. Boards recognize we need that in the boardroom. They recognize we're in a moment of disruption. Oftentimes CIOs hear that and they think, oh, that's me. Maybe. Are you really at the forefront of the disruption? If not, I think there's a great opportunity to step forward. If you are, I think that the future is incredibly bright. And it goes back to a lot of the things that you were just talking about in terms of where there are opportunities for technology leaders to be impactful to the business, driving revenue, finding new opportunities, et cetera. So I think it's a fantastic moment of opportunity for folks, here in the room.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I echo that entirely. And I think especially as something that Katie said, the role of the CIOs moving further up the tree, tending to report ever more into the CEO, be part of the executive committee, move back to the office to be amongst that team is certainly something we're seeing. I think the point on titles is an interesting one. And I've got a little title fatigue, which I hope I don't offend anyone here. Although it's great to see the storytelling, the impacts that the stories of today came out, justifying the titles that have evolved over recent years. But it's amazing how often we start a CIO brief with a client, and their first question is, should we call it a CDITO? Because it might sound better to candidates, and you have to draw them back to the topic to say, well, what is the problem you're looking to solve? So I think that's something we've certainly seen more of.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more, because it does sort of seem like an alphabet soup sometimes. And of course, every company has its own context, but where does the line get drawn between digital and tech and data and information and what have you? I'm curious, within that sort of spectrum, is there one of those that's sort of leading the charge? Data, for example, is that starting to play a bigger role in the title conversation? Katie, maybe to you?
I think if we could use the title orchestrator, it would make a lot more sense, because I do think the head of technology, whatever they're calling it, is really orchestrating across the entire C-suite and creating value. And that depends on who we're talking about that's sitting across the table. I think there's certainly a lot of emphasis on customer facing in any industry, B2B or B2C, and what technology can do there. But there's equal pressure and emphasis on operating an efficient organization. So call that back office. I mean, I think it's just creating value across the board. You do have to rein back to what is the problem you're trying to solve. And if you're open on title, let's just hone in who the right person is and then see what resonates with that individual if you have the freedom to come together and meet that way.
Oftentimes we will launch a search referring to the role as the global head of technology, which I would presume everyone in this room knows isn't really a title. It's more a description of the nature of the role. And then to Katie's point, as we're having conversations, let's see if people have a strong feeling about what they really need the role to be called. If the role is you run corporate systems, it doesn't make sense to call it orchestrator of president of digital.com. It's the head of corporate systems. And I think that while it might initially be enticing to the market to say it's a chief digital officer, et cetera, once any informed executive looks into it and says, but that's not really what the job is, I think you're going to get a lot of backlash because people are going to feel like there was some element of bait and switch. What I would encourage people in the room to do is think about what you said around what is the nature of the remit, and does that remit make sense as the next chapter of your autobiography? And if so, then you'll figure out the right term for it. But it's crucial to figure out what the role actually entails.
I think the other title, which is a topic we're going to kind of go on to, is the Chief AI Officer. And I haven't seen the proliferation of that role like perhaps it was promised. And I think that's probably a good thing. I think there's an awful lot of work the CIO does, which is behind the scenes, not always sexy. And you'll know this, of course, much better than I will, around getting systems to talk to one another, or the complex integration work around data. And so I think that's been kept somewhat to the background.
Yeah, it's been interesting. The conversation has quickly gone from, do we need one? Do we need an AI officer? And who should it be? Does it need to be the top technology executive? Does it even need to be in IT? Is a question that's come up quite a bit. I'd be curious how you've seen that evolve at all. Do you see something similar, Art, around kind of the jump and fade, or are AI officers still hot?
The whole AI marketplace seems completely untethered from all of the other kind of market ballast that we deal with. We didn't have a bunch of clients coming to us asking for experts on blockchain or a SPAC executive, et cetera. But the demand for world-class AI talent really is unprecedented right now. The compensation packages are kind of inexplicable. And even the tenure that you look for, because it's such a young, nascent discipline, a lot of people aren't really sure what they're looking for. But increasingly what we see is those roles reporting directly into the CEO. They are P&L owner roles. They are expected to be the users and customers of corporate systems data, but they are not expected to be the caretakers of that data. We see interesting models where you've got chief product officers who sit inside of those kinds of organizations, or people who are kind of this bidirectional AI officer and product officer, et cetera. But I would tell you that I'm of the mindset that a properly formatted conversation about AI is not a technology conversation. It's a business conversation. And so I think that the reality is, and I presume almost everyone here in the room sees themselves as technology executives, fair? In my experience, many of your business partners at work perceive AI to be a technology topic and will oftentimes lean back away from that conversation. And I think it's a great opportunity for you to lean in and talk about how AI can completely reimagine, disrupt business, et cetera. And so for those of you who are clamoring for the seat at the table, I think that this is the entry point for you.
Now, to Katie's point earlier, that focus on value and impact,
Absolutely.
even moving away from the technology a bit. Switching gears just slightly, Henry, as someone who's working in the US and the UK and the rest of Europe quite frequently, I'd be curious to hear how you see any distinctions between those markets and the ways in which folks are coming to you and talking about talent.
So there's a few people I've spotted in this audience today who have had that experience of moving to Europe and being a CIO in those markets. There's many more similarities than differences, and I'll start with that point. And I think if you're talking about a consumer goods company with international operations in London, it's going to be very similar to a consumer goods company with international operations in New York. If you get outside of London into the provinces, it gets quite small, quite parochial, quite quickly. So there are far more similarities than there are differences in general, in the main part. But there are differences. And I think one of the big differences is the attitude to risk and ambition and technology investment. And you see that formulated in many different ways. I mean, the salaries, remuneration for a start in Europe is considerably lower for the comparative skill set than the United States. And I think that reflects the ambition. Even points around reporting line, it's far more common for the role still to report to the CFO. And if you are on the ExCo in a European or a UK-based business, you're bound by much more stringent governance rules around withholding bonuses, withholding stock. So there are fundamental differences there. I mean, I met someone recently who was a British national, moved to the East Coast, the West Coast, and he sold a business to LinkedIn. And he summed up the differences in the culture quite neatly for me. He said, if you're trying to do something in Europe, something entrepreneurial, something different, people will go, "Oh, good luck." Whereas in the West Coast, in the US in particular, people will go, "Oh, good on you. How can I help?" And I think that intrinsic point is true. There's a stereotype in that, but it's true. But I think Europe's waking up a bit. It's going to have to catch up. But a lot of the conversations we're seeing is around a greater appetite for technology risk and technology investment, and positioning the role more aligned to, I think, more of the US counterparts.
Art, you mentioned boards at the beginning of this conversation. Curious what your read is, and Henry and Katie also, on the market for CIOs or other technology leaders on boards. I think it gets talked about a lot, but then in practice, you hear things like single issue director or other sorts of things that may halt that momentum a bit. Just curious what you're seeing now.
Yeah. So I would say that the basic eligibility requirement for being on a corporate board is you've got to be a well-rounded business executive who spikes deep in some relevant area. And so you may have heard me say single issue director because I say it all the time, but there's no market for single issue directors. So don't position yourself as the CIO to be on the board or the CISO to be on the board. Everybody got frothed up about that one a year or so ago. But if you can legitimately position yourself as the person that your CEO and board rely upon for business decisions, fully informed by technology affordances, considerations, et cetera, then that's an interesting place to be. But then you've got to ask yourself, how can you show that you are a well-rounded business executive? The easiest way, simple math to do it, is to say, do you have a P&L? And by and large, CIOs don't have P&L, but don't write yourself out of the script on that one. I think a smart move that I've seen some people do is go to your CEO and say, I'd like to be the executive sponsor of this new incubator that we're doing over here. I'm not going to get in the middle of the operations of it. I'm not wandering off my day job, but it will ensure that ELT has visibility of the incubator initiative, et cetera, and it helps you begin to tell your story of being the business executive that the business relies upon, et cetera. So that would be my strongest admonition for folks who are in the room trying to figure out how to make steps in that direction.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Just to add to that, I think they're sort of coming together, quite honestly. I think that the role and the evolution of the role is starting to map closer to what boards are asking for. I am not part of our board practice, but our head of our board practice brings me in every time there's any technology even comes into the room. I get brought into it. And in the last 2 years, I've done 8 board searches with him. Now, I've been at Heidrick for 24 years and I've run the practice for 15. If you asked me 15 years ago how many board searches I've done, it would have been 0. So I think that the role and the evolution of the role and how it's starting to shape and the responsibility, the value creation, the even revenue growth that this person is tied to, I think it's starting to come together with what has historically been the checklist for board seat.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think I can see a few faces out here who serve on publicly traded boards and who can certainly attest to that narrative. Katie, staying with you a little bit, you talked about the reporting structure changing a lot more now direct to the CEO. Again, quite a few people in here who are experiencing that. But for the folks who are maybe making that shift or considering a role where that's going to happen, as a leader, what kind of mindset shift do you need to have in order to be an effective executive when that reporting structure shifts?
I'll take a stab at it because I think I had to even change my own style because my client was changing. It was changing from what historically might have been a COO or a CFO to a CEO. And I think their time is super precious. I think they're looking for crisp communication. They're looking for results and someone who's going to help really drive the strategy of the organization. And they're not usually proficient in technology. So I think it's also someone who knows how to communicate to them in a language that they understand. So those are a few things that I've seen. And I've seen where, when we've presented candidates to CEOs where, I know the person is fantastic, but the communication piece is what didn't get him to the finish line, him or her. So.
Totally agree. I'll add to it that oftentimes we have conversations with CEOs and we've got a slate of candidates, some of whom may be exceptional, but we have to tell them this is not someone that should report directly to you. And that's not a ding against them, but just to all of the points that you raised, their fluency in the language of business is not where yours is. And sometimes that's a great fit because CEOs are often stretched way too thin with too many direct reports already. The other thing that I would add to what you said is you're not getting a lot of face time with the CEO. And I know everyone wants to report to the CEO, but it's going to be really quick, brief interactions. And you can go really off script pretty far before you ever have a sit down one-on-one with the CEO to find out that you had totally missed the mark. So not every CEO should have the CIO or top tech exec reporting to them. Not every top tech exec should be reporting to the CEO.
That's true. I'd love to talk a little bit about how the folks in this room can sort of build the best kind of relationship with you all, whether they're looking for a job or not. And vice versa. Would love to hear about the ways in which you give these groups feedback. But, considering everyone has been or will be in the job market at some point, what is the best way to sort of set the tone and start those relationships in order to position themselves for the greatest amount of success? Let's start with you.
I put this question to my team, and I quite quickly got a long list of complaints back. So I'm not going to share those with you. They're quite tactical. My point really is going to be one of simplicity, and I think it's about being honest with yourself and with the headhunter what you really want. And I've got tired, and I no longer ask the question of what kind of CIO role, because the 95% of the time I get an answer back, which is, well, it can't be turned the handle. It's got to be changed. And I think you've got to go further than that. And especially with the relationships you keep with our community, you're not going to be good at or fantastic at everything. I think you've got to pick whether you're a transformation specialist, whether you're a disruption specialist, maybe you're an innovation specialist, maybe you're a crisis management specialist, but really work out what value you bring to an organization and what value set you're going to align to and be successful with. So it's perhaps very simple advice from my side, but I'll start with that.
I would suggest, and this may not be the most opportune time for everyone, but when you change jobs, I think that is the perfect time to reach out to someone at each of the search firms and say, just want to let you know, I've started a new job. Here it is. Here's my updated resume. Plan to be here forever. Please update your records. It's been great working with you. And oh, by the way, if I can ever help you with any suggestions on searches you're doing, don't hesitate to reach out. I know that this may seem counterintuitive, but we always kind of assume no matter what the pretext is when you reach out to us, it's, hey, I heard there's a search you're doing. Can you put my name in the hat? And so I just think it's a great way to reconnect, stay current and on the radar when you clearly are not looking for that. I would also say, if I may, don't spam everyone at the search firm. We kind of keep the list of the people who are always spamming all of us. Having a 15-minute conversation with 20 different people at each of the firms every quarter is actually disadvantageous to you. And then just have, I would say, one person at each of the firms that you are connected to, someone who knows you, someone when opportunities arise where they would say, oh, I think you should call Sally. She's someone that would be a good fit for an opportunity like this.
Well, I look around this room and I know a lot of people in this room, and I'm grateful for the relationships that we've built. In some cases, I've helped place you. In some cases, I've teed your name up to our board practice and you're sitting on a board as a result of it. But I think I would just say approach the relationship with curiosity. That word happens to be probably the biggest word we use in specs and I think in position descriptions. And I think it's a great word to use in terms of, the relationship you can have with us. I think one, you can learn a lot about what's going on in the market that might benefit you, even as you build your own teams. And I think you just never know, as we call you, it might just be the right thing for you. When I think back to those that I've placed, more often than not always, but more often than not, I've built a relationship with that person over time. And so I am typically calling you knowing you've got 2 kids, one's in school, in a special school, and you're not ever moving, or you're married to someone with a health issue and the doctors are really critical. Like we start to learn all those things that are really important to you in life, behind the scenes of those that are most important to you, but also just what you're trying to do in your career. So I would just say approach the relationship with curiosity. And I think knowing one more person who can maybe help or benefit your career cannot hurt you.
Another tactical one, but in an interview process, are there particular areas where aspiring technology leaders trip up most often?
I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for you two on this answer. I mean, I'm not a CEO or a CFO of a prospective hiring company, and I think some mistakes that CIOs make when I'm interviewing them is they go into too much detail, perhaps dealing with a more simplistic headhunter. But I think it's really important to be output focused, short, sharp clips and messages. Yes, of course, going into the right level of detail, but a number of candidates do trip them up, and we'll have to stop them and say, no, can you make that more concise? So I think picking the right message for your audience is probably one component. And I think the other one on outputs. I mean, we're under a lot of pressure to be part of the solution, which I think we're all proud of, to improve diversity in all forms of the placements we make. And I think it's a really good area where anyone, no matter of their background or diversity, can actually show great data points about the impact they've made. So again, data-driven outputs, measurable outputs is something I would certainly encourage in all aspects of one's experience.
2 thoughts that I have. One is, if you are in transition, own with honesty the reason that you're in transition. If you got let go, you got let go. Figure out how you want to present the story. But oftentimes we have conversations with people where it's like, now, why exactly did you leave that job? And their answer does not line up at all with what we know to be the case. The facts are what they are. Own it. And if you need to talk through it with folks who you trust, who can be a sounding board for you, please do that. But don't tell us something that we all know is not really the case. I think it's also incredibly important for people to understand what the current legal landscape is around compensation disclosure. And it's changing. It's very fluid. It varies from one municipality to the next, and far more nuanced than we would ever endeavor to go into in this room. But you really should understand what the legal landscape is and how you respond to questions about compensation, whether that's a question intended to target your current and historic compensation or your expectations. But when you get into that conversation, the way that you respond can really shed light on how people perceive you.
I remember we had a CEO. I've been at Heidrick for 24 years, and it was the first external CEO that we had. Tracy Wollstonecraft. He came from Goldman Sachs, and he came at a time where we needed a leader that would sort of bring us back to what is most important to our clients. And I'll never forget the advice he gave all of us was read the last 3 letters of the shareholders from your client. Your client doesn't care about process you're going to run on a search or all the tools that you have at Heidrick. He cares that you understand his business and that you're going to help solve a problem. And so what I think is most important for an executive is they're interviewing, let's say, for a new job, and they're sitting in front of an executive team. I think it's tie your story to theirs. Everybody wants to be wanted. And so I think those that have done a tremendous amount of research on the company that they're meeting with, and then being able to tie their own personal story to their story, it just wins. People lean into the conversation versus sort of pull away and maybe start looking at their phone.
I love that. It's like, be a human, do your research, deliver value, right?
That sounds pretty good.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the rapid fire conversation today. It's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Goodbye.